Thank you, Minister. I'll now take the first group. I'll take 5, and we'll start with 3 minutes again and see if we can accommodate everybody with that time. My first contributor is Mr. Ibrahim Igit from Turkey.
Sayın Başkan, özellikle İrlanda'nın komisyon başkanlığı, dönem başkanlığını almasını kutluyorum ve başarılı bir dönem geçirmesini diliyorum. Balıkçılık faslı tanıtıcı tarama ve ayrıntılı tarama toplantısı 2006 yılında gerçekleştirilmiştir. Ve ulusal mevzuatımız ve uygulamalarımız hakkında Avrupa Birliği tarafına Türkiye balıkçılığı hakkında bilgi vermiştir. Gıda, Tarım ve Hayvancılık Bakanlığı'nda yeni bir Balıkçılık ve Su Ürünleri Genel Müdürlüğü kurulmuştur. Mevcut Su Ürünleri Kanunu taslağının güncel Avrupa Birliği mevzuatı çerçevesinde
I understand that the minister must have his own interpreter with her
tedbirlerini arttırmak ve sürdürülebilir avcılık faaliyetlerini etkinleştirmek için su ürünleri avcılığını düzenleyen tebrikte değişiklik yapılmıştır.
Excuse me, sir, have you got translator?
Ne diyor?
Yes.
Yes. Avrupa Birliği, Türkiye bir nolu tarım ve
I understand there'll be a consecutive interpretation after the minister has spoken.
balıkçılık alanında diyaloğu sürekli kılmak üzere balıkçılık diyalog çalışması grubu kurulmuştur. Bizim ülke olarak talebimiz müzakereler ara verilmiştir. Bu müzakerelere ne zaman başlanacak? Özellikle de 13. faslın balıkçılıkla ilgili olduğu için başlatacak mısınız? Bunu öğrenmek istiyorum. Teşekkür ederim. Devam.
Mr. Minister, I would like to congratulate the Irish presidency for this event, for the organization of this event, and I wish all the best for a successful presidency. The EU-Turkey introductory screening meeting and the detailed screening meeting were held in 2006 on the Fisheries chapter, and the EU was informed about the legislation and the implementation in Turkey related to fisheries. A general directorate on fisheries and aquaculture was established within our Ministry of Agriculture. Work is being carried out on the revision of the bill on aquaculture with a view to ensure its harmonization with the current EU legislation. Changes have been made with the notification of regulating the fisheries and aquacultural harvesting in order to ensure again a higher degree of protection of species and effectuate sustainable activities in this field. The Turkey-EU Aquaculture and Fisheries subcommittee meetings are held on a regular basis, and the Turkey-EU Fisheries Dialogue Working Group was established in order to ensure dialogue on a regular and permanent basis. We would very much appreciate if we could kind of be informed on whether or when the negotiations on this chapter could be opened. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Mr. Jose Ala Lorenz from Spain.
Thank you very much, Chairman. First of all, let me thank the host country, Ireland, for their hospitality. Thank you for welcoming us here. Thank you also to the Irish government for their position of support to what is happening in fisheries in Spain and also in Ireland and other countries. On discards, well, I'm not going to go into the agreements that have already been made, that were made a few days ago, but there are a few suggestions that I would like to make. I think that perhaps we rushed into things and more time should have been given. But I do think that in order to avoid problems in the future, we do need to ensure that we have better selectivity in fishery processes and also in processing and in the marketing of fish in the future. Now, what I've just heard from Commissioner Damanaki is, of course, very important. She has said that the discards agreements are going to be dealt with region by region. But I'd also like to talk about traditional fisheries here. We are in favor of transferable fishing quotas, but not for traditional fisheries. We think that traditional fisheries really ought to be dealt with through the products themselves, how near the breeding grounds are, the different types of activities, the different types of equipment used, the different types of gear used, the economic dependence on these fisheries of the ports, selectivity, the size of companies as well. And we've also got to look at sustainable yields. This is something, of course, that is important to all of us. We want to have sustainable fisheries. We want to make sure that our breeding grounds can recover. And we do need to have, therefore, serious scientific reports that we can use on. But also with a social aspect, we need to hear from trade unions. We need to hear from fisheries as well. They have to have their input, not just the administrations. And briefly, also, let me talk about the fisheries and maritime funds. These are very, very important for traditional fisheries as well, and also to improve the security of and safety of crews on board ships, also how they can help us lead to better energy efficiency, modernization of the fleet as well. Also fleets that are fishing in foreign waters. We have to make sure also that we work on quality of the fish that we catch as well. So all of these are changes that do need to be made in the way we fish. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, and apologies, I got called your colleague instead of yourself. So, next is Ms. Anne McIntosh from the UK.
So it's lovely to see Commissioner Damanaki back, and Simon, Minister Governey as well, rejoining us this afternoon. These reforms certainly seem very sensible, flexible, and for once based on science. Just two brief questions. The discard ban, when we looked at the original proposals in the House of Commons Committee, we were very concerned that some species would survive if discarded at sea, and that we were very keen that the flexibility that you've both outlined will cover the fact that we don't wish to replace discards at sea with a discard at land. So if you could give us a reassurance that that is the case. And the second question more specifically as well to Commissioner Damanaki, on the legal base, has the Commission now sort of agreed with the legal base, and the excellent model that has been agreed between the Swedish and Danish fishermen and their governments, is that a way forward for regional control? Have we actually now got an agreement on the legal base and the way forward?
Thank you. And next from the French Senate, Ms. Renée Nicou.
Oui, merci.
Thank you.
Thanks to Commissioner Damanaki for her presentation. We still have some concerns, though. The state of fishing stocks have declined across Europe. The latest report last June shows some improvement in stocks. The CFP is not as big a failure as that outlined in the Green Paper in 2009, though we agree there is a need for reform, not any type of reform, though. We need to look at MSY for all stocks. There's a problem with the total discard ban. Some bans are not necessarily a good idea. Of course, fishing fish just to throw them back into the water is a nonsense. Many fishermen, though, are looking at more selective gear, and that, we think, is the best approach. What's going to happen with undesirable fish stocks that have to be landed? Will that not harm resources and fishermen's livelihoods? Would the EU not lead to a fishing industry leading to the production of fish meal to the detriment of fish stocks? That would be a paradox for the new common fisheries policy and flies in the face of the desired environmental goals. We can aim for zero discards, but that could be particularly damaging for multi-species fishing vessels. We think we need quotas respected and try and deal with fraudulent declarations. When a quota has been set, the quantities of fish fished need to respect that quota. Which measures are in place to have a more strict discipline across the fishing sector? Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Mr. Ben Anders Johansson from the Swedish Parliament.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I must say the proposal is in many ways a very good step forward for the future sustainable fishing. And from Sweden, we feel sorry that we were alone of keeping 0% discard last Minister Council. And from a Swedish point of view, we think it's very important that you get all fish landed if they can't survive if you throw them back to sea. Control must be a nightmare to handle when you accept above 0% discard. So I hope, my dear colleagues, that you can listen to the European Parliament proposal in this certain matter in the coming trialogue. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. I now revert to the Commissioner and then the Minister. Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Let me give first an answer to the Turkish delegation. I very much welcome their presence here, and I can confirm that we are now cooperating in a better way in the Mediterranean. Last year I have visited Turkey, and after this visit, yes, we have agreed, and now we have joint projects referring to the control in the Mediterranean. Also, we have received a representation of their administration in our agency in Vigo. And yes, we are trying to work together also in international organizations referring the bluefin tuna, referring to other species. So what I can say in general is that we have a better cooperation now in fisheries sector with the Turkish administration. I very much welcome the improvement of our relations, and I have already organized a next visit to Turkey before summer. So I think in general there is a progress referring to fisheries sector, though we have still some problems and we're trying to do better. Referring to the enlargement procedure and the opening of the chapters, this is not only about fisheries, I'm afraid. You know perhaps that there are some member states of the European Union that have put reservations in a lot of issues referring to this process. So what I can say is that the Commission as a whole still thinks that we have to have Turkey on board. We have to work more on that. And referring to me personally, I'm a neighbor. I'm coming from a nation which is in the neighborhood. And I can assure you that I'm going to do my best, because I believe, really believe, that Turkey has a position in the European Union. This was my personal belief for many, many years. And I would like very much to cooperate to overcome all the obstacles. Let me now move to the issues referring to the reform. And first, about the discard ban. As the Spanish representation already said to us, and I can agree with you, what we have first to do is to go for more selective gears. I agree with you, sir. What we really need is to give our fishermen the possibility to have the best gears in order to avoid discarding in general. The issue is not how to get what we're going to do with the fish, which is caught there, but how we can manage not to get the fish we don't want in our gears. So for this, we are going to have a very good funding line in our new instrument for the financial instrument for the next 7 years. And I can say also that for small-scale vessels, we're going to increase the financial rate up to 75%, referring to the new gears, and referring to some countries that are under program up to 85%. So actually, for our fishermen, it will be rather easy to get provided with those gears. Nets, other gears that can go for better selectivity. A lot of taxpayers' money are going to it. Also, about modernization of the vessels, I can say to you that all measures needed for safety are already there for the safety of our fishermen. There is still discussion in the Parliament and the Council about the way we're going to handle the problem of engines. I know that from some member states there are demands for having financing aid for new engines. Other member states are not in agreement. On this, I cannot say something concrete. We need to work more. But about coastal areas, small-scale fisheries, and the other instruments, the money will be there. Also about the discard ban, I can assure Mrs. McIntosh that species with high survival are already out. So about these high survival rate species, we are sure that the fishermen can bring them back to water, throw them back to water. And about the regional control, there were a lot of discussions about what is the proper method for controlling the whole exercise. In Skagerrak, we are going to implement the CCTV cameras approach, and there we are in a good progress because we have the ambition to go for this from 1st January of next year. From other areas, I think that we can not be so strict and leave the member states to decide on this, how they are going to control under the regionalization aspect of the new reform. But of course, we will be there to help. We are going to ring fence a special amount of money, 30% is our proposal, let's see, about control and scientific advice measures. So this is a good use of people's money. About Mrs. Niku, I don't know if I pronounce your name correctly, I'm sorry for that. What I can say is that I share your concerns about the mixed fisheries. Yes, there is a problem, especially for Mediterranean and other regions, because it's difficult to have to take the best advantage of all these fish. But what I can say to you very, very openly is that we are going to give money for storage mechanisms. This is the way to handle the problem. Storage mechanisms on vessels and also on land in order to facilitate our fishermen to go for everything. And to finalize, President, I'm sorry for taking so long. I can say that there are different opinions about de minimis rule. Of course, Swedish has the most strict approach with zero de minimis, zero exceptions, but other member states want to have some de minimis exceptions. But I would like to take your attention to the fact that whatever the de minimis will be after the trialogues, it will be only for a phasing in period. So after certain years, the minimis can be out. And this is something on which we have to stick on. This is my personal opinion. But we'll see what the ministers and the presidency are going to say. Thank you.
Minister.
Yeah. First of all, just I really do welcome the presence of a Turkish minister here. You're very welcome, and I hope, as the Commissioner said, that we can continue to make progress from an accession point of view for Turkey. In terms of the comments that were made by my Spanish colleague. Yes, of course, there's a need for more selectivity here. Ultimately, this is about financing and helping fishermen to become more targeted in the way in which they catch fish, and incentivizing that, but also having a positive and negative consequence, if you like, if you're not buying into the new realities, and that's what an obligation to land is all about. But certainly, we are not going to leave the fishing industry on its own to adapt here. The Commissioner has repeatedly said that, and I can assure you I've said that to my industry also. We need to work with fishermen, with the industry, to actually make sure that the new policy that we're now outlining and supporting is workable for them, as well as protects fish stocks. In relation to the transferability of quota, This, of course, is a voluntary measure, so countries can introduce single transferable quotas if they want to, or they can maintain their existing positions whereby the transferability of quotas applies within certain segments of your fleets but not in other segments. So, for example, if you want to prevent the traditional fleets being subject to that type of quota buying and selling, if you like, well, then you can do that. There's no problem with that under the CFP reform. In relation to what we use the funds for, we will have and continue to have a discussion on this. There was a very active discussion in the Council of Ministers on this issue as to whether we should be using funds for modernisation, for replacement of engines, or whether we should be trying to prioritise funds for more targeted fishing gear. And again, I think we'll see that conversation, that political dialogue continue as we move into trialogues. In terms of the points that Anne raised as regards the discards ban, as Maria has said, we have actually taken account of species that can survive being caught in a net, being brought on board a fishing trawler and being thrown back into the sea and live to fight another day. It takes a tough fish to survive that, but there are lots of tough fish out there. Sharks, dogfish, certain types of skates and rays, for example. And again, I think that will make our life a little easier in the complex mixed fisheries that we have to operate under, like the whitefish fishery, for example, off the south and west coast of Ireland, where there are a lot of British trawlers, as well as French and Spanish and Dutch and Portuguese and so on. It's a very complex mixed fishery, and we will be challenged in terms of the effectiveness of implementing an obligation to land. And so obviously if there are fish that a fisherman does not have a quota to land and can survive being put back into the sea, well then we should be facilitating that, and we are. The comments that Renee made in relation to the undesirable fish stocks being essentially killed on land, are killed and landed rather than killed and put back into the sea. That is why, because of that type of challenge, that's why we're talking about phasing this in, stock by stock, over a 3-year phase-in period. And that's why we're delaying the introduction, so that we can prepare for that in the most effective way that we can by introducing new selectivity measures and so on to protect stocks. If there are fish landed, there is going to be, on a temporary basis anyway, the mechanisms to actually, for countries to allow those fish go into for charity use or indeed for fish meal. But in the case of juvenile fish, I think we need to be very careful that we do not create any market to incentivise the landing of juvenile fish. In relation to the complexities of discards, we must, in my view, take a pretty hard line in relation to juvenile fish. We can deal with that issue through more targeted measures, through mesh size and through design of nets for the vast majority of stocks. And really, the landing obligation, where it will be complex, will be around adult fish, other species being caught at the same time when you're targeting a main species. And that's what the exception, or that's what the flexibilities will be there for in terms of interspecies quota transfer and annual quota transfer. In terms of the Swedish position, I can understand the Swedish position. It's a purist position, if you like, which says that once you introduce any exceptions for fishermen to allow them to discard small volumes of fish, well then it becomes impossible to police. And that is a concern that I think we have to try and address. But I also think we have to work with the industry here and not see them as outlaws in this process. The fishing industry also understands the value of avoiding discarding. They are the industry that relies on healthy stocks more than any of us. And so what we have here is a pragmatic approach towards ensuring that there will be small volumes of fish that are caught during fishing activity that are not marketable, will not have much value, and it makes no sense to bring that type of fish, whether it's a crushed fish or whether it's a fish with no value. It doesn't make sense to bring some fish ashore. And just on the final point that Maria made, the decision in relation to a de minimis figure in Council isn't just a transition mechanism. We are starting with the transition of a 9% de minimis figure, moving down to a 7% de minimis figure after a number of years as part of the transition. But the proposal coming from Council is that 7% de minimis figure would be maintained until and unless there's an agreement to review that at some stage in the future. But that is a different position to the Parliament, and we will obviously have to find some compromise between the Council and the Parliament position during the trilogue process.
Thank you, Minister. Next in the group is Thomas Pringle from the Irish Parliament.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank Commissioner Damanaki and Minister Coveney for their explanation and the responses to the first round of questions. Just in relation to the issue of discards, I think it is very important that fishermen don't feel any sense of penalty if they are implementing full technical measures so as to not to catch juvenile fish, and when they are landing all fish caught, that there is as much buy-in from fishermen so as that they don't feel that they're being overly penalised and that they can buy into the process, because I think that the ban on discards is actually the right way to go, and we need to make sure that fishermen see that as well, and that the penalties aren't too onerous on them if they are complying with the technical measures that are required to ensure that all fish are landed. Just a question on the regionalisation. I was just wondering, will the proposals ensure that all member states comply and participate in the regionalisation aspects, particularly in fisheries where there will be a large number of member states participating, and that to make sure that all member states comply with the requirements there?
Thank you. Next we have Mr. Yannikis Gabriel again from Cyprus.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Cyprus agrees with the achievement of the maximum sustainable yield by 2015 or by 2020 at the latest. Cyprus also supports the gradual decrease of discards, since we are convinced that the application of landing of all fishery resources will not solve the problem of decreasing discards, especially for species without quotas. As regards the proposal of regulation of the Common Market Organization for Fisheries and Aquaculture Products, Cyprus considers that the revised proposal will significantly improve consumer information on the fishery products, provided that the final text will be clear when it's come to labelling requirements, and that there will be no conflict or overlapping with other existing regulations. Finally, it is of utmost importance for the new common fisheries policy to set objective criteria in the distribution of available financial resources to member states, taking into account the specific territorial and geographic characteristics of each member state. Particular attention should be paid to ensure that the allocation of funds is at a critical mass in order to justify the administrative burden and for the efficient implementation of objectives, thus having a real impact on the sector. To this end, the principle of proportionality should be incorporated into the proposal for a resolution of the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, and further simplification should be pursued. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Joe Byrne from the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again I want to welcome the work of the Commissioner and indeed the Minister in relation to dealing with this vexed problem of discard. I think it has been a very welcome development. Can I ask the Commissioner, in relation to Northern Ireland, the fishing industry is quite a small industry, but there has been great concern for a number of years about the restrictions relating to total allowable catch, i.e. the quota, being worked alongside the days at sea, and very often this can prove difficult for the fishermen. And secondly, in relation to the overall situation, what is likely to happen in relation to the innovation as regards the year? Will the Commission be conducting any research on the year, or is it going to be left to independent member states? Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Andres Eriksson from the Nordic Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Damanaki and Minister Coveney, for your presentation. We have a big support now for this reform in the EU Parliament, and this is a good ground, of course, to stand on for the fisheries in the future. I have 4 short comments from our side. We in the Nordic Council welcome the conclusions in the EU Parliament. They are very much in the line with the views expressed by the Nordic Council during the hearing. If we do not apply ecosystem-based fisheries management, fisheries will not have any future. The reform of the common fishery policy must move us in that direction. Large-scale industry fishing is important for the food security. However, the environmentally coastal fishing is very important for many regions and must coexist with industrial fishing. We welcome the position of the European Parliament not to accept this catch. We have achieved this in some of the Nordic countries, so we know that this can be done. I have one small question about these matters. What the Commissioner say about the gears is very interesting, but could you explain a little bit more in detail what will be done to implement the discard ban? Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you all for all these very interesting questions. So, Mr. Pringle raised the issue of regionalization and how we're going for it. And I can say to you that my personal opinion was to try to have a more ambitious proposal on regionalization, but we have to have something that can be compatible with the treaties, as we can imagine. So what we're trying to do is to exhaust our margin to give to regional bodies authorization in order to decide on some issues. So how I can imagine it, I think that the member states have to be around a table at the sea basin approach. And then if they can agree, the Commission will take the responsibility to go for this decision. If they cannot agree, then the Commission and the Council, of course, in important cases, or the Parliament, under co-decision, they have to interfere if there is no agreement. That means also that the Commission can keep the control as a guardian of the treaty, the control competence in the case of some member states that they don't want to comply with the rules after the regionalization procedure. So there is a regionalization procedure. The member states can arrange and decide upon some things, for example, technical measures and other things. But at the end of the day, they have to comply with the rules, because the rules will have the stamp, let me put it, of the European Union. So if they are not going to comply, this will be something on which we can have the consequences as at any other case. So this is how it works legally. It's rather complicated, I know, but this is the only base our lawyers have found in order to go for the regionalized approach. Mr. Giannakis raised the issue of the consumers and the markets, and I would like to here also to underline that this is very, very important for us. The Commission's proposal had a reference to the day of the catch as a factor that had been there in the labels. So we would like the consumers to be informed throughout Europe about the date of the catch of the fish products they are going to buy and eat. But the Council didn't accept that, also the Parliament didn't accept that, so we're going to have a label with less information let's see what we can do. We are now going to discuss it through trilogues. Let's see what we can do. For us, the good labeling of the products is very, very important, because this also can be of great help of our small-scale fishermen and of our local communities, because these are the areas from which fresh fish and not defrosted fish come, from which good fish with qualities can come. So for us, it's very important to have good labels, because this is the only way to give our local fishermen an advantage. That the WTO rules cannot give us the possibility to do it otherwise. So I would like to drive your attention to this issue. Mr. Byrne raised the issue of innovation of the gears. So the answer is the following. The member states also, they can provide, they can have a research and come with proposals for a better and more innovative gear, a better gear. Also, on a regional basis, we can have proposals for better gears. What's happening afterwards? The Commission gathers all these proposals and we send them to our scientific committee, because it's for them to decide if there is real innovation in these gears. But in any case, for new gears, we are having this 70% funding for the small-scale fisheries and 50 to 60% for the rest for the big vessels. So I think that for more selective gears, there will be a possibility for having good news. But the new gears, the innovative gears, have to get the approval of our scientific committee first, just to be sure that innovation is there and selectivity is there. It's not a political decision. And the representative of the Nordic Council also referred to gears. For us, also gears are very important, and for everybody. We have been trying to to study a little bit your experience, the experience of your countries. Also there is, in some cases, some de minimis, I mean informally, referring to some exceptions, referring to throwing some fish back to the sea. But in general, you have a very good experience, and we are going to exchange practices, and I hope that at the end of the day, we can have a common policy, let me put it this way, between all the EU member states, Norway and our allies in all these areas, in the Baltic region, in the North Sea, up to the Arctic front. I think we can do it together, and I'm grateful for your advice.
Thank you, Commissioner. Minister?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, in relation to Thomas's questions and comments, I'm glad you think that a ban on discards is the right way to go, but I know that you have a detailed understanding of the fishing industry, so this isn't going to be easy, but it's doable as long as we give people time and as long as we help people make the adjustments through scientific research and the finance to help them change. In terms of regionalisation, the way in which this will work, I think any regionalisation policy has to have some safeguards, and I'll tell you why. If, for example, you take this part of Europe, where you have more fishing fleets in the waters of one member state than anywhere else, so Ireland has a responsibility for monitoring Spain, France, Britain, the Netherlands, Portugal, some Belgian trawlers also, and our own fleet. There could be 8 different types or different nationalities all fishing in the one area. If the countries in, say, the Western Waters decided to come together and make a decision, if they can agree unanimously on a new measure for, stock management, for more targeted measures and so on, for maybe a set-aside area for a spawning ground, well then, that's great. And what's being proposed on regionalisation will allow that. But what happens if you have a majority of countries who want to do something, but maybe the country that is responsible for the implementation of the rules vehemently disagrees with that in terms of the manageability of it or the cost of implementing it or whatever. You then would have a situation, for example, in our country, in Ireland, where you could have 4 or 5 big countries dictating how fishing could or should take place in waters a long way from home for them. That has huge consequences in terms of cost of implementation for us. So there has to be a safeguard whereby if you can't get unanimous agreement, well, then we have to go back to the normal decision-making process that gives small member states the protection of the Commission and the co-decision process and Council and so on. So I have a strong preference for regional decision-making, don't get me wrong. But there are certain scenarios whereby we don't want small countries to be steamrolled by 2 or 3 bigger member states who want to see something done differently. And so that is why you have this balance now, I think, between making decisions at a reasonable at a regional level when it's possible to get agreement on it, but when there isn't agreement, well, then we go back to the usual protections that are there in the European systems and institutions to protect small member states and indeed big member states at times from being simply voted aside. So that's my views on regionalisation in terms of the practical implementation of it. Yes, let's make it work, but let's have some safety checks as well. In terms of the comments that the Cypriot member made around labelling, I'd like to see us do more on labelling, but we can only do what is politically achievable as well. And as regards objective criteria to allocate the funds that are available, the problem with objective criteria is that everybody has their own. You know, so and everybody will make a case if given the opportunity to do so, that actually their case is more special than everybody else's, and they should get more money than everybody else. And this is the problem with objective criteria. And so we will have to work through this process and see how it works out. In relation to Joe's comments, the R&D that's necessary for gear selectivity. I mean, I think what you will see is you'll see the Commission supporting the R&D efforts of member states or groups of member states at a regional level to actually put a lot of resources into researching better ways of targeting and catching fish, and that is as it should be. And I think that member states are perhaps in a better position than the Commission to undertake that research because they understand their local fisheries a lot better. But I think the funding support coming through the EMFF from the Commission would be very welcome in that regard, and I think that funding will be there. And finally, Anders, what will be done to implement the discards ban? Well, we will have transition arrangements, but also we will have very clear rules in terms of what needs to be done and when. So it'll be phased in over time, there'll be transitional arrangements, there will be some flexibility to allow the industry and member states to adapt to the new realities, but also there is a determination which says that there is a new reality that cannot be avoided any longer in relation to discards and an obligation to land. And I think the signal that has been sent both from the Parliament and the Council now, and the consistent position of the Commission, I think now shows a new direction which is not going to be reversed through the trialogue process, based on sustainability and based on ending the practice of discards, which will benefit everybody, including the industry.
Thank you, Minister. We're getting near the conclusion, but before I do conclude, I'd like to call on our Lithuanian chairperson, Mr. Salus Buchevicius, I think I've got that right, to make a few comments. As most people, I'm sure everybody's aware, Lithuania follows on the 1st of July as the next presidency at the end of our trio of presidencies. So, Mr. Buchevicius. And just to clarify, he will be using a translator, so we'll let you speak and then your translator. Okay, thank you.
Ačiū, garbusis pirmininkė, mėly kolegos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues.
Man didelė garbė visos Lietuvos delegacijos vardu pasveikinti Airiją su 7-uoju jau pirmininkavimu ES tarybai. Nuoširdžiai dėkojame airių kolegoms už puikiai surinktą Žemės ūkio ir žuvininkystės komitetų pirmininkų susitikimą, įdomią ir aktualią programą, šiltą priėmimą ir airišką svetingumą.
On behalf of the Lithuanian delegation, it is a great honor for me to congratulate Ireland on its 7th successful presidency of the Council of the European Union. Please accept our sincere gratitude to the Irish colleagues for a well-organized and relevant meeting, warm welcome and traditional Irish hospitality.
Šių metų antrą pusmetį Lietuva pirmą kartą savo istorijoje pirmininkaus ES tarybai. Šiam ypatingam renginiui, manau, mes labai atsakingai ruošiamės.
In the second half of 2013, Lithuania will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union for the first time in its history. We will do our best to ensure that our presidency is equally successful.
Noriu jūs visus pakviesti šių metų Liepos 21-22 dienomis į bendrą kaimo reikalų komiteto pirmininkų susitikimą. Maloniai visų lauksime Vilniuje.
I would like to kindly invite you all to joint meeting of the chairpersons of the Committees on Rural Affairs, which will be held in Lithuania on 21st to 22nd July. We look forward to welcoming you in Vilnius. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. And for our part, we would like to wish Lithuania well in its first presidency. And as I said last night, our first presidency was 1975, 2 years after accession, so we've had a little bit more of a lead-in. Just to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, this morning in my opening remarks I referred to the importance of sustainable common policies in both agriculture and fisheries. So I welcome the presentation today by both commissioners, and especially Commissioner Damanaki, who had a delayed flight getting here, and indeed Commissioner Scholz, I think's flight was delayed last night. He didn't arrive until after midnight, so we do appreciate the effort that was made. I think it's important, for, as I said earlier, that commissioners and ministers hear from the floor of the Member States, but it's equally as important for the members from the floor of the Member States to appreciate the work that is involved in getting common agreement across 27 Member States when you consider the complexities of co-decision and trilogue talks, etc. So I think for that purpose, I hope today's meeting session has been useful. Great strides are being taken, and I commend the hard work that has been done to ensure in the main that the common agreement, the Council agreement on the implementation of discard bans, I think, which has been an emotive issue, and the possibility of catch quotas by beginning at the end of this year is put in place. That the Presidency compromise package on basic payments is agreed. That agreement in the European Council on the MFF earlier last month is endorsed, and its implications on the CAP budget, and that progress on outstanding CAP issues in the Council of Ministers does conclude. The greening, I think, of CAP, as I think the Minister said this morning, is a landmark exercise to ensure the availability of food whilst maintaining an environmentally friendly bias. I welcome the comments of Commissioner Scholz in clarifying certain aspects of the greening of the CAP, although some other comments, I suppose, give us an indication of the amount of work that still has to be done to get an agreement, and certainly with the ambitious target of achieving a conclusion by the end of the Irish presidency. But through smart and harmonised quota provisions, maintaining price stability, we've moved away from the infamous wine lakes and butter mountains of the 1980s, but we now seek a need to abolish quotas for goods such as milk and sugar. And this has been broadly welcomed, and I'd like to thank the Commissioner for his comments that suggest that we, Ireland in particular, will have an opportunity to re-enter the sugar quota regime when the current regime is due to end in 2015. We, as a committee in our own Parliament, submitted a paper to the European Parliament and the Commission and the Council indeed on that issue, because for our secondary food manufacturing, we see it as a vital component and one that has cost a lot of money and to actually source, and as the Minister said earlier, the availability of supply became an issue during last summer. I'd like to extend a special word of thanks to our panel on young farming, who delivered what I consider to be excellent presentations, and I'm sure gave us parliamentarians some food for thought as we consider ways to improve access to farming across Europe. One of the contributors, who shall remain nameless but he's from Ireland, said to me, "Now that we've done the talking, what do you plan on doing?" So you can't but admire the enthusiasm of youth and energy. So I think it does behove all of us, because as the Commissioner Scholz said this morning, there's only so much the European Parliament can do. And as our Swedish colleague made the point, if it's just money, it becomes a bubble. I think we discussed at lunch. It has to be carefully managed so as to give supports that are targeted to allow young farmers with talent and capacity to enter the sector. I think we could reflect on the fisheries area as well, because a lot of the talk has been about science and innovation and new gear. And I think, with no disrespect intended to the existing fishermen across Europe, I think we do need to attract in young fishermen and young fisherwomen, indeed, to the industry, to ensure that those innovations are actually implemented in the same way that we were talking about farming and agriculture. And we also need, particularly in fishing, to make sure that it's a safer industry, because quite apart from anything else, every day that people go out to sea, they put their lives at risk. And as an island nation, fishing is particularly important to Ireland. And I welcome the scope and detail of Commissioner Damanaki's presentation. The sustainability of our EU fishery is of the utmost importance. And I'd like to wish Minister Coveney well, and I'm sure he'll do his very best to ensure a conclusion of this dossier before Ireland hands over the presidency. And indeed, if I could be a little bit impartial and commend Minister Coveney, for those of you who may not have come together in the same with agriculture and fisheries before, the challenge on either one of those policies to get them concluded by June is significant, but to try and do the two of them doubles up the burden indeed. And as Minister Coveney said earlier, he has a third baby, less than 2 weeks old, so the demands on his time are quite onerous. So we do wish him well, and I think he has demonstrated the capacity to deliver that with cooperation and goodwill from his colleagues. I think we must deliver, and I'm confident that we will. And finally, could I thank my colleagues from across the Member States for your contributions here today. I think without that, the meeting and the session would not have had the same value. And I hope both our Minister and our Commissioners go home from here, and indeed the officials from the Commission and the Parliament, with a better understanding of the issues, but a clear understanding that we do want the same goals at the end of it, but maybe we have different priorities. So, on that note, I did mention last night about the gathering, and our Lithuanian colleagues and others have referenced the entertainment and the hospitality was shown last night. We will consider that was only a taste of what we have to offer. If the weather is a little bit better, as it will be, we would encourage you to come back and fill the car or the plane with colleagues. But in the meantime, I'd like to wish you a safe journey home and enjoy the rest of your stay in Dublin. And as we say in Irish, slán a bhaile. And the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.